Welcome to Microeconomic Theory I. In this first module, we'll explore the very foundations of how individuals and firms make decisions, and how those decisions lead to the outcomes we observe in markets. We are going to walk through the concept of rational choice, utility maximization, expenditure minimization, production theory, and decision-making under uncertainty. Don't worry, even though these topics can get quite mathematical, I'll explain them here in an intuitive way that you can follow without formulas. 1. Introduction to Microeconomic Theory and its scope. Microeconomics is the study of decision-making by individuals, households, and firms, the smallest building blocks of an economy. While macroeconomics looks at the big picture, GDP, unemployment, inflation, microeconomics zooms in to see how decisions are made at the unit level. Think of it like looking at a forest versus studying individual trees. Microeconomics asks questions like: why do people choose one product over another? How do firms decide how much to produce? How does a change in price affect consumer behavior? These questions are not just abstract, they have real-world relevance in business strategy, public policy, and personal finance. 2. Rational choice, the foundation of microeconomics. At the heart of microeconomic theory is the concept of rational choice. In economics, rational doesn't mean always wise or morally correct. Instead, it means that people make decisions systematically, aiming to achieve the best possible outcome given their preferences and constraints. Imagine you're at a coffee shop choosing between a cappuccino and a latte. Your decision will depend on your tastes, how much money you have, and maybe even how much caffeine you've already consumed today. If you consistently choose the option that gives you the most satisfaction according to your own preferences, economists call that rational. Rational choice assumes preferences are complete. You can compare any two options and say which you prefer or if you're indifferent. Preferences are transitive. If you prefer it to B and B to C, then you prefer it to C. More is better. Generally, people prefer more of a good to less, holding everything else constant. Of course, in reality, people sometimes make irrational decisions, but microeconomics starts from the rational model because it gives us a clean framework to predict behavior. 3. Preferences and indifference curves. To describe how people make choices, economists talk about preferences, essentially, how you rank different combinations of goods and services. An indifference curve is a visual way to show combinations of goods that give you the same level of satisfaction. For example, imagine you like both tea and biscuits. There might be different mixes of tea and biscuits that you find equally enjoyable. Those mixes form one indifference curve. Key characteristics of indifference curves. They slope downward. If you have less of one good, you need more of the other to keep satisfaction constant. Higher curves represent higher satisfaction levels. They never cross. That would violate the logic of consistent preferences. Why is this important? Because it helps us predict what people will buy when prices and incomes change. 4. Utility and utility maximization. Economists measure satisfaction using the concept of utility, a way of quantifying preferences. The actual number assigned to utility isn't important. What matters is how it changes with your consumption choices. The utility maximization principle says that consumers choose the combination of goods and services that gives them the most satisfaction within their budget constraints. Let's go back to the coffee shop example. Suppose you have 1,500 Nigerian Nairas to spend and cappuccinos cost 500 Nigerian Nairas while lattes cost 750 Nigerian Nairas. You choose the combination that fits your budget and maximizes your enjoyment. The point at which your indifference curve is tangent to your budget line is your optimal choice. That's the point where your willingness to trade one good for another exactly matches the market trade-off determined by prices. 5. Expenditure minimization. While utility maximization is about getting the most satisfaction for a given budget, expenditure minimization flips the question. What's the lowest amount of money you need to spend to reach a certain satisfaction level? This is useful in cost of living studies, welfare analysis, and public policy design. For example, a government might want to know the minimum subsidy needed to ensure a household can afford a nutritious diet. In theory, expenditure minimization and utility maximization lead to the same consumption choices. They are just two sides of the same coin. 6. Income and substitution effects. When the price of a good changes, two forces come into play. Substitution affect, you might buy more of the cheaper good and less of other goods. Income affect, if a good becomes cheaper, it's like having more money left over, so you might buy more of everything. For instance, if the price of rice falls, you may buy more rice because it's relatively cheaper, substitution effect, and you might also buy more chicken because you now have extra money, income effect. Understanding these effects helps economists predict the impact of price changes, taxes, and subsidies on consumer behavior. 7. Production theory, firms, technology, and the production function. So far, we've been looking at consumers. Now let's turn to producers, the firms that supply goods and services. The production function describes how inputs, like labor, machinery, and raw materials, are transformed into outputs, finished goods or services. For example, a bakery's production function might describe how many loaves of bread can be produced with a given number of workers and ovens. Key production concepts. Short run, at least one input is fixed, e.g., factory size. Long run, all inputs can be varied. Marginal product, the extra output from one more unit of input. Diminishing returns, at some point, adding more of one input while holding others fixed will lead to smaller increases in output. 8. Cost concept and long-run versus short-run decisions. Firms make decisions not only based on how much they can produce, but also on the cost of production. Fixed costs don't change with output, e.g., rent. Variable costs change with output, e.g., raw materials. Total cost, the sum of fixed and variable cost. Average cost, total cost divided by output. Marginal cost, the cost of producing one more unit. In the short run, firms may operate even if they are not covering total cost, as long as they are covering variable cost. In the long run, they need to cover total cost to stay in business. 9. Decision-making under uncertainty. Finally, let's discuss situations where the outcome of a decision isn't guaranteed, for example, investing in a new business, buying insurance, or deciding whether to launch a new product. Economists use the concept of expected utility to describe how people make choices under uncertainty. Risk preferences vary. Risk-averse, prefer a sure thing over a gamble with the same expected value. Risk-neutral, indifferent between the sure thing and the gamble. Risk-seeking, prefer the gamble. Insurance markets, financial investments, and even personal career choices all involve weighing potential payoffs against risks. Wrap up for Module 1. We've covered a lot of ground, from how individuals make rational choices, to how firms decide what and how much to produce, to how people and businesses make decisions under uncertainty. These ideas form the building blocks for Module 2, where we'll bring individuals and firms together in markets, explore strategic behavior through game theory, and tackle problems of asymmetric information.